part does Andre play?
He's the director.
Young and dumb in my early 20s, I watched the film Vanya on 42nd Street for one reason. I already loved My Dinner with Andre, whose stars and director it shares, and which was heady stuff for an artistically bent teen, but that wasn't the reason. Nor was it because I was fascinated by the theater itself and was showing a little talent myself as a precocious young playwright. The movie, staged in a nearly condemned building with actors gathering from the streets of New York for a rehearsal of Chekhov's play, blurring the lines of when actors are characters or are portraying themselves, this was the ideal playground for a young actor convinced that Stanislavski was a hero and Anton Chekhov a demigod. But that was also not the reason. No, I rented the movie because of the cover of a Vanity Fair magazine showcasing rising actresses of the day, which included Uma Thurman, Nicole Kidman, Angela Bassett, and most importantly to me, Julianne Moore. Here's her introduction in the film.
I am happy today. Birds singing, sun shining.
You could see where I was coming from. Thankfully, my baser instincts led me into a wonderful viewing experience. Vanya on 42nd Street presents Chekhov's play without the false trappings of realist cinema, which is ironically false because sets and costumes, as wonderful as they can be, aren't really needed when the play is all about the people in it. Vanya on 42nd Street is one of those rare movies which captures the theater-going experience, the raw experience of knowing that this is false, but the intimacy with the performers makes it all more real than any movie could be. Huddled down in the mid-90s with a VHS rental and a 10-inch television set, I was blown away as I had been a few years before when I saw My Dinner with Andre in equally non-ideal circumstances. So returning to these movies about 30 years later, I've been happy to see that, though Chekhov hasn't changed and expectations for film adaptations and theater have, the 37-year-old Chekhov seemed to be writing for both the young and old me. Over 8 short years, Anton Chekhov popped out 4 of the greatest plays ever written. Uncle Vanya, the second of these, keeps a firm gaze in 2 directions. It displays the world weariness that Chekhov would revisit in The Three Sisters and The Cherry Orchard, but it never forgets the youthful passions which had made up The Seagull. The play follows 2 young women, Sasha, a boring country girl who boils with passion, and Yelena, a glamorous trophy bride who has given up on her own life. Yelena is married to an aging art professor with no empathy for anyone. Several other elderly figures totter throughout the story, but between these 2 groups are the heart of the play, 2 men with one foot on either side of middle age. The country doctor Astrov churns the story forwards, a brilliant intellectual with unrealistic ideals who disrupts the estate where the action takes place. And Vanya himself is our audience surrogate, overworked and underpaid, passionately in love with the despairing Yelena, seething with rage at Yelena's husband and fate itself, but resigned to his dull life, and completely befuddled by how Dr. Astrov's detached idealism seems to invigorate everyone around him, except for himself. If this sounds a little like My Dinner with Andre, there's a reason for that. Maybe this is a chicken or egg question, but it's hard to watch Vanya and My Dinner with Andre back to back and not think that Andre Gregory was either fitting his own life narrative into Uncle Vanya's mold, or that he saw Chekhov's play as the perfect expression of his own struggle with the modern world. Gregory only shows up once or twice in Vanya on 42nd Street, but his presence as the play's director is felt throughout. I know 1981 was a long time ago, and art film sensations ain't what they used to be. Sensations like Hiroshima Mon Amour, or Last Year at Marienbad, or even Pulp Fiction don't really capture months of conversation from the movie-going public like they once did. So for you young whippersnappers, here's a recap of one of the most innovative or infuriating movies ever made. Famously, My Dinner with Andre literally is just 2 guys having dinner for 2 hours. Vanya on 42nd Street is a bit more action-packed, but so is Mowing Your Lawn.
So, do you think you'll forget me?
True story. Director Andre Gregory rose to prominence in the 1970s New York theater scene, and then he dropped off the face of the earth. Years later, he reconnected with his friend and devotee Wallace Shawn, also an actor and playwright, and the two, with director Louis Malle, filmed a reconstruction of their discussions about where Gregory had disappeared to and why. Gregory spouts some very weird theories about life.
I wouldn't put an electric blanket on for anything. I think that kind of comfort just separates you from reality in a very direct way.
And Wallace Shawn declares that Gregory is a little crazy, and there's no reason to give up his electric blanket to reach enlightenment. Louis Malle, who was not above making over-the-top films, but specialized in the quieter slice-of-life pieces, shoveled Gregory and Shawn's disagreements into an intense three-course dinner. My Dinner with Andre brought Andre Gregory back into the public consciousness, back into the fold of normal artists, and into mainstream cinemas. And so, a decade later, Gregory, Shawn, and director Louis Malle collaborated on Vanya on 42nd Street, a similarly simulated dress rehearsal for the seminal Chekhov play. Now let's get to the tale of two viewings. Uncle Vanya's Dr. Astroff has a lot of ideas. Like Andre Gregory, he has trouble not expressing all of his ideas all at once. Vanya's young niece Sasha is completely taken in by Astroff's philosophy.
He says that forests embellish the land, and that they instill in man a love of beauty, that they raise the mind.
Trees are life, Astroff believes. Houses could be made of stones and fires can burn peat, so it's sacrilege to take the life of a tree unless absolutely necessary. Sasha gushes about Astroff's theories to the point where Vanya and her grandmother have to applaud as if they were at a performance. But it isn't performative, it's the passion of a true young heart. Sasha confesses desperately to Yelena that she worships Astroff, but she's afeard to say anything because she is plain and poor. Note, I have yet to see a version of Uncle Vanya where they actually cast a plain actress as Sasha, as if the directors were afraid we can't sympathize and find attractive a woman who isn't pretty but is just a wonderful person. Similarly, a 21-year-old viewer of My Dinner with Andre, this one at least, gets swept off his feet by the intense stories Andre Gregory tells about his wilderness years, wandering the Sahara with a Japanese priest on camels, spending weeks in the woods at the foot of a ruined castle with a crowd of musicians with no common language, being buried alive.
We drank instant coffee out of the top of my shaving cream.
When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. And it is. And Louis Malle makes sure that Wallace Shawn has a lengthy monologue towards the end where he gets to tell Gregory that his ideas are kind of garbage. Shawn's pragmatism eventually made him a success, rather than just a sellout. He is an absolute delight in The Princess Bride.
Inconceivable!
In Toy Story.
Great, now I have guilt!
In The Cosby Show. In Clueless. He's certainly an eccentric in his own way. The story goes that Shawn attended every single performance of Gregory's production of Alice in Wonderland when it was in New York, which incidentally also featured Larry Pine, who plays Dr. Astroff in the film. All of Shawn's performances in mainstream family fare are marked with bizarre individualist flourishes.
Never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Vanya is nearly identical to the frustrated Wallace Shawn, who kicks against Gregory's wild search for meaning. And Gregory, well, like Dr. Astroff, he seems lost in contemplations about astral connections, that his name appearing alongside André Breton and other surrealists on a page in the magazine Minotaur is a sign that he should take Le Petit Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry more seriously, just like Dr. Astroff's frantic desire to talk to the trees, really seductive to a 20-year-old like Sasha, or my younger self. So seductive that the flaws in Gregory/Astroff were as invisible as the flaws in Shawn/Vanya were glaring. So when you're 21, what's exciting? Well, Julianne Moore, potentials and new ideas, moving out of what you know. Yelena, who is ably played, took the new love and potentials and ideas too soon, and is now locked into a loveless marriage with an insomniac who's probably a fraud. She knows how hopeless her choices have made her, and she can't help but laugh at her own misery. Vanya is an equally tempting figure. He feels outflanked on every side by people who are simply better looking or more interesting than he could hope to be. A young viewer might identify with that, hoping against hope that he or she is simply wrong. But when you're in your 40s, happily married with a decent career, here's a fact. Commitment is the biggest adventure you're ever going to go on.
Well, have a real relationship with a person that goes on for years. That's completely unpredictable. Then you've cut off all your ties to the land and you're sailing into the unknown, into uncharted seas. The closer you come, I think, to another human being, the more completely mysterious that person becomes.
As Gregory says in My Dinner with Andre,
that's why I think that people have affairs. Have an affair, and up to a certain point, you can really feel that you're on firm ground. You know, there's a sexual conquest to be made. There are different questions. How intensely can you talk about Schopenhauer at some elegant French restaurant? Whatever nonsense it is.
Well, screw that. I will take the adventure of monogamy any day. If Vanya on 42nd Street and My Dinner with Andre are about anything, they're about taking chances, and that your chances don't always pan out. Louis Malle built a career on films that look and feel improvisational. You can pretend that My Dinner with Andre is a spontaneous conversation and not an edited, scripted recreation of real-life conversations, given a 3-act structure like any other film. Vanya on 42nd Street begins with a faux casual gathering of the cast on New York streets, establishing Julianne Moore as just a regular girl before she slips into Yelena's fabulousness, and showing Larry Pine as a regular horny dude before fitting him into Dr. Astroff's improbably sexy and idealistic skin. But all of this is foreshadowing. Yelena, despite her glamour, is a normal woman. She's crushed by the lack of choices in her life, and Dr. Astroff is just as susceptible to Yelena's charms as the next man, despite his lofty ideals, despite everyone agreeing that she's lazy and dangerous. This balance between improvisation and tight control brings me back to what's probably Louis Malle's best film, 1958's Elevator to the Gallows. It's a murder heist that goes terribly wrong, with the killer stuck in an elevator because of dumb timing, and his getaway car hijacked by joyriding teens. The perfect scheme is torn to shreds, but the script is airtight and everything fits into place. And then, Malle went and hired Miles Davis to do the soundtrack. Entirely improvised in an empty studio watching the film for essentially the first time. All that planning thrown out in a wild gamble for the soundtrack. And the movie is probably best remembered today for that gamble paying off, which is wonderfully ironic in a carefully crafted film about our best laid plans being derailed by life's vicissitudes. Gambles in Vanya do not pay off. Sonia trusts her love life to Yelena, which leads Dr. Astroff to make a pass at Yelena instead. Vanya snaps and goes on a thankfully unsuccessful murderous rampage. The professor tries to sell off the estate, which turns its rightful heirs against him and nearly gets him killed. This may be where you expect me to say that the adult me now sympathizes with Wallace Shawn or Vanya, and sees the error of sympathizing with Gregory and Astroff. Well, if anything, I like to say the opposite. It's foolish to give yourself entirely to dreams like Sonia does, but equally foolish to give up trying like Yelena does. Dr. Astroff and Vanya are merely the grown-up versions of the Sonia and Yelena. It's not a question of before and after, it's about choosing a course and steering through it. My Dinner with Andre was a testament to Andre Gregory wandering back from the wilderness and trying to talk his way back into normal life. Spiritually, it feels a bit like Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas. Also about a man who's given up on society wandering back from the wilderness because he has duties back in the real world. Gregory's acting career after My Dinner with Andre is a weird collection of films. Gregory gotta eat, so Demolition Man happens. I'm definitely not above that. But there's a flicker of those wilderness years when Gregory's hanging out naked with Patrick Dempsey, or being cast as John the Baptist in The Last Temptation of Christ. It feels a little like typecasting. I never knew that ancient Judea was so full of New Yorkers until I saw The Gospel according to Martin Scorsese. Anyhow, John the Baptist is your ultimate Grizzly Adams wilderness man. But when John the Baptist wandered back into society, he was quickly imprisoned and beheaded. Andre Gregory regained public grace, and is now living peacefully in Cape Cod. I'm happy to say that both he and Wallace Shawn are living out long and successful careers. But in the end, it's Sonia who has the last word.
You don't know how hard it is for me. You can't know.
All we can do is live. And when we come to die, God will take pity on us and we will live a life of radiant joy. And we'll look down and we'll see evil and all our sufferings bathed in a perfect mercy. We shall rest.
Growing up is terrifying. Faithfulness, whether to a person or an ideal, is terrifying. But I'll take it over an electric blanket any day of the week.